What's up, galera? It's Ohei with Jinga and Grow Strong, and today we're doing pretty much a walkthrough or a book. I don't want to say it's a book review, and pretty much a guide or the cliff notes to the Little Capoeira book by Nestor Capoeira. It was printed in 1995. This is an awesome book, and if you are any kind of capoeirista starting your journey, you need to read this book. This is one of the Bibles of capoeira, and it's very concise. But before I do, I just want to make a quick comment on my last video. I made a video called Racism in Capoeira, where I detailed racism in capoeira from the beginning of time. Capoeira, pretty much the transatlantic trade in the 16th century, all the way through the quilombos, the runaway slave colonies, and everything featured there, and then into the 60s and 70s with the Rio Senzala style capoeira, and then went on to the 80s and 90s, where I did mention Mestre Jolon, Grande Mestre Jolon in Capoeira Luanda, where I did state some inaccuracies about their group and Mestre Jolon. So I went ahead and took down the video. Some capoeiristas reached out to me and had corrected out some inaccuracies in what I did in that video. So I want to apologize to Grande Mestre Jolon, Vieira in Capoeira Luanda. I took it down, and once I get my facts straight on that, I'll re-upload another video on racism in capoeira. So anyway, once again, I apologize to Mestre Jolon. He has been like 4 or 5 times that I've met him. He's opened up his rodas, and his instructors has opened up their academies to me, and I've trained there. So deep apologies to you guys. Only the best and continued success to Mestre Jolon, Vieira, and Capoeira Luanda. That being said, let's go ahead and get on with the show. Okay, so this book by Nestor Capoeira was dedicated to Mestre Leopoldinho de Merval Lopes G. Lacerda. He was born 1933 and died in 2007. He initiated Nestor Capoeira in Capoeira, where he went on to go train with Senzala and got his master's cord in Senzala Capoeira. So anyway, the book was dedicated to Mestre Leopoldinho. It's translated by Alex Ladd. Been a very good translation to preserve some of the poetic styling of Nestor Capoeira. Alex Ladd, of course, born in Rio in 1964, moved to New York and trained with Mestre Jolon himself. Speaking of, okay, now lives in New Jersey. Okay, the preface of the book initially started out as a mini capoeira manual for Nestor Capoeira's students while he was teaching at the London School of Contemporary Dance in 1971. Now, he wanted to just use it for 2 different reasons. Once it kind of blew up, and he wanted to use it for more than that. But one, to inform the public about capoeira, the history, philosophy, music, rituals, the myths, and the significance. And then also, to provide a practical method of teaching and learning that will properly introduce the beginner to capoeira, from anyone who's pretty much has a difference in culture than Brazilians. So it's very important. Okay, so the organization of this book is in 4 parts. First, it talks about history. We're going to spend the most of the time talking about that. The jogo, actually the game, the music, and a good way of learning and teaching capoeira. Okay, and pretty much detailing the different moves, the different aspects of. So that's a long part, but there's a lot of drawings and some of the most iconic drawings of this book. Of capoeira come from this book, so it's pretty awesome. From there, he does have an appendix where he puts updates. He talks about conferences, meetings, and then he does have a kind of a bibliography where you can kind of look up stuff in the back of the book and go and trace it back to exactly where it's talked about. And then he'll go over terminology as well. So I do spend a little bit of time going over that. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the history does start in 1500 with Pedro Alves Cabral, which was a Portuguese guy, coming to the new land to, I guess, discover or conquer, however you want to say it, the new land in South America. Now, they tried to immediately use natives as slave laborers, but they were too weak. They died and they ran off. So this is what begins the transatlantic slave trade, which is super important, where they were buying African slaves in the west coast of Africa and bringing them to the new land to work. And it makes a distinction there, Nestor Capoeira, about this culture of Africans, how it was vibrant. It was their culture was vibrant. They had these weird instruments like the bidding bow, and they ate things like vatapa, and they brought with them their African deities, where they created candomblé, which is a mixture of African deities and Catholic saints. And that he states very poetically that their history was not locked up in books, but passed down from father to son, which is very poetic. I like the way he says that. Now, during slavery, Nestor mentions that in 1814, other African dances and expressions were prohibited. Okay, so before that, capoeira was thought of as something that was hidden in in a dance. But he says before that, capoeira expressions were permitted and even encouraged because it was a safety gauge or a valve against internal pressures that were created by slavery. So this is like saying they let them express themselves because it kind of brought out differences between the various African groups and a divide and conquer type of way to let them kind of expose differences in the different tribes that they were bringing over, until the arrival of King Dom João the Sixth, in 1800, because of Napoleon's takeover of Portugal. They kind of fled and came to the new land, and Dom João is, as far as Nestor says, he knew something about destroying a people's culture to dominate them completely. Okay, so from there he does talk a little bit about Bimba and Pastinha. Okay, the capoeira was outlawed in 1892, and this gave, by this time, capoeira gave Africans a sense of nationality, gave them self-confidence, and it created cohesive groups and dangerous, agile fighters. And during the slavery times, it said it injured them. They would get injured while playing capoeira. So this is one of the reasons why they outlawed capoeira in 1892. But in 1888, it was actually the slaves were freed. So it was just something that he was mentioning, and he kind of plays with the dates a little bit. Nestor talks about how was capoeira practiced in general. Well, he was saying, was it done in Recife and Rio, the violent games of Rio in Recife, where it was more of a martial art? Or he keeps mentioning that in Bahia it was done as this ritual dance and a ritual ceremony where they would go through the motions of, and it wasn't just an overall martial art and fight, that it was, it was a pastime. It was done of togetherness, as a community thing. And he said it was also performed in hiding, where they could practice their martial art, or it was done in the open as a sign of defiance and resistance against, the law, because it was outlawed during this time. Okay, now this is a good part that I took out of it. Now, he said the news alert. Now, I always say that, capoeira, and you may have heard of a lot of people saying that capoeira was a 500-year-old martial art form created by African slaves in Brazil. It was hidden in a dance so they could protect all that, yada, yada, yada. Now, he says, Nestor Capoeira says, this was highly unlikely because in 1814, other Afro dances and cultural expressions were outlawed also. So there was no incentive in hiding it in a dance. So he was saying that why would they hide it in a dance anymore? Everything, African dances were outlawed also, so there's no incentive in hiding it. So he offers these alternate theories. And one was like the Magapeixe, the Angolo dance, that he said it was created by the zebra dance in south of Angola, where it was the coming of age of women or girls coming of age, and that's where it came from. And he says that no, it was kind of shot down also by other people and other capoeira philosophers at that time. But he said he exposes that the reality is that it's probably a mixture of all of them. People talked about Zumbi as the leader of the Quilombo dos Palmares, that he developed it more of his fight. And he said that the truth is probably a mixture of all those three. That it could have been a zebra dance mixed with hiding it, original slaves hidden from their masters as a self-defense art, and then of course some of the other African martial arts dances that were from Africa. So that's that. But he says at that time in 1994, when he wrote the book, that with more research it would become more clear, because there were documents burned in the 19th century in Brazil. So we kind of lose some of the historical accuracies, which is fine. It's a beautiful art, and Nestor walks you through that. Says it's probably a mixture of all of them. Okay, the freeing of slaves. We go on to describe the 1808, the Golden Law, freed by Princess Isabel. Okay, she was the imperial princess of Brazil, and although he does talk about how slaves, even though they were freed, they could not freely assimilate into regular society. They turned into criminals, hired assassins. And then from there, they started using more daggers and clubs in their capoeira. And it says in the 1900s was the first appearance of the malandro, which is very exciting. They had to be, so from a life of slaves, they couldn't assimilate. They couldn't just go work as as a carpenter. They couldn't go open a business. They couldn't do these things. So they become these hired criminals. And in 1900 was the first appearance of the malandro, which is an archetype character. It's pretty awesome. And he talks about in Recife and in Carnival, the malandros would lead samba schools for protection. And at the beginning, they would lead the samba schools, and it usually ended up as they battled with other samba schools, and it usually ended up in fighting and bloodshed. Now, the malandro was this archetype. They were playboys. They were cunning. They would live by their wits. They were thieves. They were tough guys. And so a lot of times you'll see these type of guys with their zoot suits, their razor blades, and pretty much dramatized. But this is where that comes from. So it's pretty fascinating. This was the real deal back in the day. At the turn of the century, though, this was, like I said, it was the introduction of the malandro. Bahia capoeira was more of a ritual art, and in Rio, it was the bidding bow. I'm sorry, and the bidding bow was introduced in Bahia. So before this, it was they would play capoeira to whatever they had, and as he explains, whatever it was, just drum. It was this. They were clapping, but finally we see the bidding bow introduced, according to Nestor Capoeira in this book. And that in Rio, he talks about this time that capoeira was nearly extinguished in Rio and Recife, and that capoeira was pretty much only present in Bahia. And this is the time where the emergence of three feared capoeiristas, Besouro from Bahia, Nascimento Grande in Recife, and Manduca Tupai from Rio. These are three main big players in capoeira at this time. Let me talk about Besouro, or they call him Corpo Fechado. He was closed body. He was untouchable. He was so good. They would say he would fly. He was amazing. He was kind of a capoeira outlaw during this time, and he was an expert in bladed weapons, and all the way until his demise. Since he couldn't read, he was sent a message to be delivered, and the message evidently identified him as the target of an assassination. So Besouro delivered the message, and he thought he was pursuing a lead for a job, but the message identified him as the target and the subject of that assassination. And he was killed by a special wooden dagger prepared by a magical ritual to overcome his corpo fechado, or his closed body. So that's Besouro. One of the other highly feared capoeiristas, Manduca Tupai, which is very cool, is in the 1890s he was a very elegantly dressed capoeirista. He was actually a business owner. He owned a fish house where they would sell fish. He had money, and he could control elections with his influence on politicians. It was said that he had 27 criminal cases against him, but he got off because of his political pull and because of the politicians that he would work with. So, wow! Even back then, he was there was these politician life guys using these capoeiristas and had so much influence. Nestor Capoeira also does briefly talk over Mestre Bimba and Pastinha in the 1930s, opening their own capoeira dojo. Mestre Bimba did it in 1932, the first capoeira dojo or academy, and then followed by Mestre Pastinha. And they're pretty much hailed as the fathers of one, capoeira regional by Bimba, and then capoeira Angola, which was held as pretty much the traditional capoeira since the beginning by Mestre Pastinha. He then goes over and talks about in the book about the migration of capoeira during this time. It spread out from Rio and Bahia, went to Sao Paulo, went to Rio, went to Minas Gerais. It went all over the place. And this was the next generation of mestres, okay, which was like Mestre Valdemar, Mestre Caiçara, Mestres Canjiquinha, João Grande, João Pequeno, Mestre Gato, Paulo dos Anjos, Leopoldinha, and of course Mestre Suassuna, where he mentions these guys. So wow, what a flourishing of the art from that part. One of my favorite parts is the spreading of capoeira in the 60s and 70s. He said that capoeira grew throughout Brazil, and in this he specifically talks about the Senzala Rio style capoeira, and this is where he trained. He initially started with Mestre Leopoldinha, but he from there went to train with the Senzala Rio type style guys with Mestre Camisa, where he got his, like I mentioned earlier, he got his red cord and he got his master's cord from there. Now, what's so significant about these guys is that they invented and they came with these belt systems, and it was pretty much the majority of them were white Caucasian Brazilians, right? And one of the forefront was Mestre Camisa. They brought more traditional style martial arts training, push-ups and sit-ups and dojo and kicking of the bag style that Asian martial arts brought. They introduced like tournaments, and so he brought up some of the things that the traditional capoeiristas kind of clashed with this new evolution of capoeira, like such as tournaments. Okay, these type of things, ritual, versus the ritualistic capoeira before. You talked about the modernization versus traditional masters, what they had of the growing pains of capoeira. So this is probably one of the favorite parts of my book that I liked, just because I didn't, when I first read it, I didn't really know. I thought it just naturally evolved, but this was a big part of it. These Caucasians developing it into a more of a traditional and cleaning up the image of the martial art. From there, the next part of the book, it talks about o jogo, or the game of capoeira. He talks about, like, what is it? What is this dance when you're first introduced to it? And it's written in a very poetic way. Like this, you first see it. Like, what is this dancing? This crowd of people in a circle. Is it a fight? Is it music? What is it? So he goes on to describe the different elements of the game, which is like the roda, the singing, the beginning of it, the ladainha. The first introduction, the solo at the beginning of the roda. He talks about, in a nice quote that I like, what we have here is a fraternal order and association whose rights, although openly displayed, have a meaning for those only who have been initiated into the mysteries of the game. So I like that. It's very, very mysterious, very like inside of people that know that. Okay, he talks about the shula, the part of the game, or the part of the beginning of the game where it's Yaruande, Yaruande, Camara, Viva meu mestre, yeah, Viva, so on and so forth. Viva meu Deus, Kokoro ko, Gago canto. These are very, very typical things that you'll hear in the beginning of the game of roda. He talks about then two men kneel. They trace magical signs on the floor to help them close the body and protect them during the roda. So all these ritual parts he's explaining, which a lot of people don't know, they just go over the physicality, the capoeira cool moves. But this is a super very important part of the book, and explaining those to beginner capoeira or intermediate capoeiristas who don't know this, who are just about the physicality. Then he talks about the quadra, and the song changes, okay, and then now the game and the roda could commence. He talks about the chamadas, or the passa a dois, where the two people are challenging each other. One person challenges the other. Two players join hands. They do a ritualistic step and then disengage and continue the game. So this is very exciting and very pertinent information that you need to know as you go on if you hope to move on into the game or to rank up and to know the history and the ritual of capoeira. This is a very awesome part, and I'm going to do a separate video on this because this is a super awesome passage. This one little chapter, it's like a 3-page chapter about the 3 levels of capoeira. The first one is, like I was mentioning, the physical level of the game. It's the fight, it's the sport, it's the dance, it's the competitive nature of the game, which pretty much everyone who knows who starts capoeira or just plays it, even a beginner knows this. And he says that most people who play regional game, that they're very keen on the sport, but they neglect the other parts. They don't sing. They're jogadores. They don't play instruments. They don't follow the history of the rituals of the game. So he says this is phase 1, the physicality of capoeira. Number 2, he says the second level of capoeira is when you finally realize that, okay, you follow the traditions of it. You respect the rituals of it. You know the roots. You know the history. You realize the social interactions of the game. And it becomes not just something that you do, but it's something that it's a daily, day-to-day part of it. Your day-to-day life. It's become something that you do every single day. And now you start understanding the malicia of the game. It's not about winning or losing anymore. You start to be seen as a master as you get better, but you think you are a beginner. Okay, and it's something that's capoeira. You start realizing that it's something that protects you, yes, and gives to you, but it also demands from you also. And you start realizing the spirituality of the art. It's very deep. I love this part. And then finally, the third level, 20 or 30 years go by. Now there's no distinction between you and capoeira. You are living it. You are a master. You possess the penetrating glance that is able to discern what goes on between two players. No longer do you have the need to experience this or that new roda or a measure of yourself to measure yourself against someone who is said to be a great player. Now you have access to a third and final level. And I love this. The third, something that can be called the mystery and deceitfulness of the game of life, about which the old masters tell funny stories and jokes among themselves, but about which they never speak with others, because there is nothing to be said unto those who do not understand it. Very poetic, very awesome. So look for that other video that I'm going to post about going over this one passage. It's amazing. It's beautiful. They then talk about, Nestor Capoeira goes on to explain about the malicia. It's an indispensable, it's the indispensable training of the game of capoeira in a mixture of shrewdness, street smarts, and wariness. It's not malice as you would understand in English. He explains that. There's two basic parts: knowing the emotions and traits of men, like the aggressiveness, the fear, the pride, the vanity, the cockiness, to anticipate the other's players and movements. And then there's a second part: the faking out of an opponent to thinking that you're going to execute a move and then doing something totally different. Feigning strength and then showing weakness. Feigning weakness and then showing strength. Malicia is usually interchanged with manjinga. You also may have heard of that. So he goes on to the next portion of the book, talking about the origins of malicia. Bahia, he said it's well known, right? Capoeira from Bahia is well known, but he wants to talk about Rio and explain this. Explaining this, and I like this because he talks about the Cidade de Deus, which is a part of Rio, similar to favelas, but it had a lot of government subsidy. They had sewer and gas and water lines, which weren't found in the favelas. And then it shows like the corruptness of the third world country, and that's where became these bandits of the Cidade de Deus. People that would rob, they would go with it. People that would come and deliver stuff, they would come in and rob them. Taking from the socialist part of the government. And this is something that he considers that slaves and bandits knew about how to survive, and that regular people didn't in the first world. And this was the second phase of it. Capoeira is in the culture of the oppressed. Capoeira knows nothing of such words valued in Western society as honesty, truth, fair play when facing the enemy. Such concepts are luxuries that are not available when you are a slave to a master who goes to church in the morning and at night rapes women in the slave quarters, not even considering them to be human. Very poetic. Wow. Very deep and very touching. So he says that this is where malicia comes from, the actual slave, and then these bandits here in the favelas and in the Cidade de Deus. So wow, pretty deep. They have to live by their wits. This is what he's saying. And then he goes on to say in the book, life is much more than just winning and surviving. It involves the joy of being alive. So all of this music, this dance, this creativity, improvisation, poetry, philosophy, and having fun is a part of capoeira too. And in the first world, does this capoeira, does it have any special ethics? Does it have any value for them about people in Europe and in North America? Well, he goes on to explain that capoeira is a tool against the forces that tend to turn people into robots, and that do not think, that they do not wish, they do not have fantasies, they do not have ideals, they do not have imagination or creativity. And it's also a tool against society or civilization who are increasingly says that one simply has to work and go home and sit in front of a TV with a can of beer like a pig being fattened for the slaughter. Now, it's a little bit deeper. Remember, this was written in 1994. It was in 1994, and I think by now there's many people who are living the dream because of society, who are sensitive to it, who are working out, who are economically successful, who are, who do all these things that he's not. So it's not just a shot. If you read this book now and, hey, this is a shot against people who are well off and who are thinking that anybody educated is not sensitive to this. This was written in 94. I understand exactly what he's saying. Take it what is will. Go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this passage. It's awesome. Okay, for the next part of the book, he goes on to describe the music. He talks about the bidding bow, how it was derived in Africa, how it had a sickle on it, which is like a little knife, and a little sharp spot on it. He says the significance of the bidding bow in Cuba, how they still use it over there. And he talks about the three different types. He describes pretty much the basics of the physical part of the bidding bow and the spiritual significance of it as well. He talks about the different toques, the rhythms, like Angola, Salbento Pequeno, Salbento Grande. He then goes and talks about the chants, or the chulas, the three different types, la ladainha, quadras, corridos, and the significance of candomblé, like I mentioned earlier, which is a mixture of Catholic saints and African deities, or the orishas. And he talks about specifically the bidding bow in his introduction. And if you're looking for a bidding bow, go check out Capoeira Connections, my new supplier, jingangrostrom.com/capoeira/connection. If you're looking for a bidding bow, they just got some fresh ones in, straight from Brazil. It is Biriba. Sorry for that plug, but go support those guys. They do a great job. The next part of the book is talking about learning capoeira. Now, I'm spending less time on this part because there's a lot of information all over the internet, but I'll briefly go over that now. He does a table of contents. That's a very good part where they break up what exactly he's going to describe, and it has some of the most iconic drawings in capoeira here in this book and that he's talking about. So he talks in the table of contents. They break it up into movement. He does defensive movements. He talks about basic kicks, bimba sequences, which are the very important teaching sequences. The sequences de ensino de mestre bimba. Right after that, he talks about how they use them in the cintura desprezada, which is a way of bimba training his players and his students how to always land on their head, on their feet. They're doing it's like judo throws. They're throwing each other in the air and landing on their feet. It's awesome. Go into that book. Make sure you buy this book. I'll put a link in the description because it's more rich. And I just didn't want to post all their pictures here. I wanted to tell you exactly the more important part of the walkthrough. But go and buy the book. Go check it out. This is like one of the Bibles of capoeira. They talk about the language of Angola, okay, which was the chamadas, the passo a dois, the chisores, and the ritual of that, not just the physicality, but the actual rituals, what you would do in a game of Angola. So that's also very significant. Now, if you're looking for a streamlined part of capoeira, check out my fundamentals of capoeira, and I'll put the link in the description as well. But because this has videos, it has tutorials, it has all sorts of stuff like that, and some of my free resources, I'll put the link in the description. But this is what he wrote. This was one of the first Bibles of capoeira where they had drawings showing you the moves. When you could learn capoeira from book, there was no internet, it wasn't developed yet. There was no streaming. So this is a pretty awesome book to have. Okay, so he finishes up with an appendix. Now, in this one, he does, Nestor, because capoeira talks about capoeira trends. He does a lot of updates in the book. He talks about the very important conferences and debates of 1984, where a lot of masters got together and talked about the evolution of the book. They talked about the pioneer meeting. They talk about tournaments. They talk about the rituals. Where's it going? Where's capoeira going? But he does talk about the pioneer meetings of 1968 and 1969. He talks about 1984, the capoeira art meeting, and then he does an in-depth dive on the Senzala group, which is my favorite part of the book, also because it goes back and to say what I was talking about. But he's updated part, and he goes into like pretty much a 20-page description of the Senzala Rio style capoeira and what exactly happened in there. Then he talks about another update of capoeira and the art and science capoeira, where they were talking about Ricardo Pena Machado. He explains how science was important, about physiology, about how they could use science now more in getting it better and evolving it. And then he's talking about, he does put a portion in the update, which is women in capoeira. We talked about big major women in capoeira, like Maria Doze Homens, who was a brutal player. She would jack people up, and she was a capoeira fighter, and it was awesome. So that's another big part of the book in the appendix where he updated that. Okay, and finally, in this last part, we start winding this up. I know it's been long, but it's an awesome walkthrough of this book. He talks about the Capoeira Federation. He talks about capoeira in the United States. And in this portion, he talks about Messer Corjon and his World Capoeira Association and the weighing in of other capoeira messes and what they thought about that. Mestre Corjon is amazing Gran Mestre Capoeira. And so specifically in this appendix, he talks about that. He does talk about capoeira in Bahia and the differences of Rio-style capoeira. And then there was a portion of in the update where he talks specifically about racism in capoeira. And I took a lot of that out of that book, and I put it in my video, Racism in Capoeira. But like I said, I took it off because of some of the inaccuracies that I had in it. But I will re-upload a different edited version of that. And then finally, he ends with talking about the old guard, or the Velha Guarda, okay, and the talks of 1984 about the development and evolution of capoeira. So these are extremely important. So if you enjoyed this quick, and it's may not be quick in yours, but I really recommend that you read the book. It's amazing. But pretty much that's a walkthrough, and those are the highlights of it, and pretty much what it goes over. But get the book because it has awesome. But it's good to have in your library and on your bookcase. And if you did think this was value to you, I recommend that you subscribe to the channel, like the video, but you also go and help us support our program that we do in my academy down in Corpus Christi, South Texas, at jingandgrowstrong.com/donate. Now, we're raising money to continue my work in South Texas to keep our doors open, and it's also to sponsor 10 disadvantaged kids in our 18-month Afro-Brazilian Capoeira program, and where we teach African Brazilian martial arts, dance, percussion, history, and Portuguese. So thanks for watching this video, guys. Let me know what you think. Put a comment below, like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to Jinga and grow strong.